Some tankers have been bypassing the Strait of Hormuz blockade by using the Red Sea. Now a blockade announced on Saudi Arabian ports in the Red Sea by Iran-aligned Houthis in Yemen mean ships are changing course again. And there's no let-up in the fighting. President Donald Trump says every time Iran attacks a ship in the Strait of Hormuz, the US will destroy an Iranian bridge or power plant.
The latest wave of US strikes on targets in Iran gets underway. Iranian state media reported attacks in several cities in the early hours of Wednesday, including Tehran and Bushehr, home to a nuclear power plant, as well as key ports. Iran and the US had agreed to a ceasefire back in April, but hostilities resumed last week as both countries battled over control of the vital Strait of Hormuz waterway. US Central Command said the latest volley was designed to continue degrading Iran's ability to threaten commercial shipping in the strait, something US Secretary of State Marco Rubio later stressed was crucial for global trade.
Commercial ships are going through the straits and they're being blown up. The United States is defending that shipping and in addition is targeting the places that are launching against those ships to continue to degrade Iran's ability to target and harm global shipping. We remain open to diplomacy. We remain open to working it out in a negotiated way, but right now they don't seem to be serious about that.
On Wednesday, Iran's armed forces released footage of their own strikes against US bases and infrastructure in Bahrain, Kuwait and Jordan. Meanwhile, threats from Yemen's Iran-aligned Houthis, seen here at a rally to impose a blockade on commercial shipping in the Red Sea, were shrugged off by the US president.
So far, it hasn't happened, might happen, but we take care of things. If something like that happens, we take care of it. You know, we've done that with the Houthis before.
Yet there have already been reports of ships making U-turns in the Red Sea to avoid passing the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Disruption to yet another major shipping route would compound an already strained global energy market.
Let's talk about that with Benjamin Schmitt from the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy at the University of Pennsylvania. Is this going to be a double whammy for people and businesses that rely on petrol?
I think this is going to be a double whammy. And frankly, we've been talking about this on Deutsche Welle for about 2 or 3 months now, that the absolute potential that the el-Mandeb Strait could be shut down in addition to the Strait of Hormuz. Obviously, the Houthi rebels in Yemen are closely aligned with the IRGC and the Iranian leadership, and now with their current threats and announcement of a naval blockade against at least nominally Saudi-bound ships in the el-Mandeb Strait in the Red Sea, that is looking like it's going to be making this crisis spread even further, even quicker.
But how real is it? Because we've heard it announced, we've heard the threats, and Trump has said it's just that right now, just a threat.
Well, it's just a threat right now. We haven't seen any credible reports of ships actually being struck in the el-Mandeb Strait or going through the Red Sea yet. We, of course, can flash back just a couple of years ago when the Houthis were effectively shutting down the strait to all but a few countries' ships, notably, of course, Russia and China. And if you look at their AIS signal on platforms like Marine Traffic, you could see them even saying, changing their origin and their destination, and instead writing in messages like not Israel aligned or coming from Beijing or something like this. It was kind of unusual to see that, but that's what we were seeing. So I think that these threats are real. We've already seen reports of some ships making a U-turn and actually diverting from that strait. And I think that we have to remember that this is not just an energy security issue. Of course, that's what I focus on. It's also a global trade issue. And of course, you can see in the pictures beside me, there's container ships, right? So what we're going to see is with the Red Sea and the el-Mandeb Strait, if that is in fact shut down and mariners don't want to go through there, even with just the threat of being struck, even if this hasn't happened yet, we're going to see global supply chains creep to a much slower level for the foreseeable future, at least for the next several weeks, while supply chains start to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope. And of course, back in the Straits of Hormuz, we're already seeing a lot of companies trying to figure out their own way to get around this, because the military solution hasn't yet presented itself to allow for reliable and safe transit of oil products through the Straits of Hormuz. So we're seeing reports even this week of some commercial maritime companies trying to offer crews, 90 days up to 6 months of salary just for one transit through the strait. And that should show you just what the economic hit is if these cargoes don't get through. And so whereas some of these mariners are actually saying, under the law of the sea, they're allowed to exit their ship if they feel unsafe, but some are going to take that risk. And so we're going to have to see this as it goes forward.
And what do you think of these other efforts to go overground, build pipelines on or through Iraqi territory, say?
Well, that's absolutely something that is underway. Obviously, the Saudis have a port on the Red Sea that they're able to get some level of volume and basically avoid both straits. You can basically load in the Red Sea and go straight up through the Suez Canal into the Mediterranean. These onshore pipelines, they take time. And I remind people, when we look back at energy security crises over the past 5 or 6 years, we're also looking at things like, it takes time, even in the fastest wartime level of effort, to build these and permit these sort of pipelines, these sort of export terminals and things like this. But we of course saw Germany, for example, build 3 or 4 LNG terminals on both the North Sea and the Baltic Sea coastline in less than a year, or just over a year, under the leadership of Vice Chancellor Robert Habeck, who was in charge of energy and economy, and getting that done. So things can happen like that, but it's going to take time. And so the localized threat to global energy prices is not going to go away, even with these diversionary pipelines, diversification pipelines being built. It will have impact one day, but not tomorrow.
What about the cost factor? Is any of this worth the cost, beside the rising human cost for the US, of course? The price tag of the war is at over $37 billion, and the Pentagon wants another $67 billion.
Well, that's a great question, and it really goes back to the outset of this war, right? What is the ultimate war aims, right? It hasn't been very clear from what President Trump has said what exactly are the aims. Now, he has come back to saying eventually that this is about making sure that Iran never obtains a nuclear weapon, and I think that everyone in global democracies around the world can agree that that is a noble and an absolutely necessary goal when it comes to our collective national security. The problem is, how is it going to happen, right? Do we have enough resources in terms of military equipment and hardware and funding being placed in the Gulf region and in the Eastern Mediterranean to make that happen, and do so in a way that doesn't allow Iran to continuously strike both U.S. troops, which we keep seeing reports of U.S. troops injured and dying, sadly, in this conflict, but also targeting of our Gulf allies as well, which will erode the political calculus on the side of the White House and the region and our regional partners and allies as well. So it's quite a mess right now, if I'm being quite honest, and we're going to have to see. Is this something that Congress is going to step in and help out with, or is this something that they're going to push the Trump administration to wind down as rapidly as possible?
Yeah, from what we're seeing today, Messi sums it up well. Benjamin Schmitt, thank you very much for chiming in.
Let's pick this up with Michelle Wiese Bockmann, who's a senior maritime intelligence analyst at Windward. That's a maritime AI company. Welcome to DW. How concerned are you about these Houthi threats to blockade Saudi ports?
Well, I think there's all indications that the industry is certainly taking it seriously. Not only are there tankers that are diverging, going dark, switching off their vessel tracking transponders. But you have to look at the Houthis' history in this. Between 2023 and 2024, they attacked more than 100 commercial ships and also killed seafarers and imperiled a lot of traffic, and that resulted in about 60% reduction in, sorry, a 40% reduction in traffic. So which it's never really been completely restored. And of course, now these threats mean that there's going to be even further reductions.
Well, and I guess you don't even necessarily need to follow through with your threat. The threat is enough to turn a ship around.
Exactly. That's the Houthi playbook. It's the threat and the degradation of the attacks and the degradation of maritime security that is enough to change vessel behavior. And you've also seen that in the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians have borrowed the Houthi playbook by threatening to blow up vessels and to impose and target particular vessels. In this case, it's any vessel that has loaded at a Saudi port. That is enough to change vessel behavior. And already you have naval forces in the area advising any US, Saudi, and Israeli affiliated ships to avoid the area.
Right. And so this doesn't sound like a problem that Saudi Arabia or indeed its US allies can sort of blow their way out of.
Well, the thing to remember is that the Saudi Arabians diverted a lot of oil to the Red Sea port of Yanbu after the Strait of Hormuz was closed, about 4 million barrels per day. About 3/4 of that goes via the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb to Asia. So this, if it is enforced, is going to have a significant impact on oil prices. And then there's also the other remaining 1 million barrels per day, which sails north through the Suez Canal to the Mediterranean. Now, if the Houthis extend their attacks to that area, that could potentially involve Egypt in the conflict. So there's a lot of uncertainty. And as yet, there have been no vessels attacked. But this is a really serious escalation in the conflict.
So can we put figures on the sort of economic effect this blockade or threat of a blockade is actually likely to have?
Well, not yet. We do know that vessels, if they do have to divert around the Cape of Good Hope to go from Asia for Europe, that's, depending on the size of the vessel, at least easily an extra $1 million in fuel oil costs. Container ships are already increasing their surcharges to account for additional fuel costs, and we've seen them omitting port calls in Jeddah. And again, the container ship industry, a land bridge from the the Persian Gulf to the Red Sea, was also helping containerized traffic as well in the area, and that's been imperiled too.
OK, and we talk about ships reversing a course. How easy or difficult is it for tankers to do that? We often hear politicians talking about economies as being like turning around a supertanker, which is literally what's happening here.
Look, it is reasonably easy, and vessels, we've seen vessels as they approach the Gulf of Aden to head to the Red Sea port, they have turned around or diverted. And also we've seen vessels that have loaded at the Red Sea port of Jeddah and they're sailing south, or they're commencing sailing south for Asia. They've now turned around, and they've also switched off their vessel tracking transponders and gone dark. So it's also difficult to have visibility. And that's also something that's very common in the Strait of Hormuz and the Middle East Gulf at the moment, because it's a contested space.
And is that dangerous for a ship to turn off its transponder? You know, if we who don't know this, we think of aeroplanes and think, well, if there was an aeroplane up there that had switched its transponders off, we'd all panic.
Well, compounding the problem, because yes, it is a navigation hazard, but it's done for safety and security reasons when vessels believe that they could be targeted by the Houthis. But there's also what we call GPS jamming, which is when vessels' signals are intentionally sort of jammed all over the place. So it's very difficult, even if you have your AIS or your automatic identification signal, your vessel tracking transponder on at the moment, to actually know where you are.
OK, thank you for that, Michelle Wiese Bockmann from Windward.
Thank you.